Some of you know who John Phillips is, but we work with his company, Philcom Global. He's our PR professional, and he's going to kind of walk us through the introduction to the war on dull buildings. You want to?
I'm happy to tell you all what the heck you're doing here. You probably have a good idea already, but I'll shine some daylight on it even more, hopefully. Yeah, let's get started. I think Doug's probably on his way in, so we'll say a little prayer for him, but I think we can go ahead and tee up everything. Thank you, Melissa, for the kind introduction. Welcome everybody to the inaugural War on Dull Buildings Summit, or WODBS for short, as we have affectionately dubbed it. As Melissa said, I'm John Phillips. I'm CEO of Philcom Global. We're an emerging industries communication firm that's so proud to work with Advanced Glazings and also the Better Buildings for Humans community. So War on Dull Buildings, it's a co-production effort by Advanced Glazings, who should need no introduction to this crowd here, glazing innovation leaders and makers of Solera and SoleraWall, and the Better Buildings for Humans podcast and community produced by AGL. And you guys know that BBFH, we're big on acronyms around here. BBFH explores the vital connection between the built environment and the human experience. Many of you are alums, so you don't need me to tell you that. So what do we mean when we talk about dull buildings? What's this all about? Dull is everything from a physical manifestation to a state of mind that is tired, lackluster, outmoded, and simply not cutting it for occupants, owners, architects, and all stakeholders of the built environment. It's a dark metal box on the highway side, grossly underserving its occupants who deserve daylight and an environment that fosters wellness, productivity, inspiration. It's failing to realize in 2024 that sustainable buildings actually impact the bottom line for companies, and so much more that we'll be exploring over 4 sessions today and tomorrow. We hope many of you here will attend as many of them as you can. Quick reminder for our panelists today that this session is only an hour long, so please do be mindful of time and keep your answers thorough, but as concise as possible to allow for maximum participation from the panel. All right, so now I'm so proud to introduce Dr. Doug Milburn, co-founder, chairman, and president of AGL, along with Melissa Chanel, marketing and innovation specialist at AGL, who'll be leading our first session today, which of course is Better Buildings Make Better Communities. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Doug and Melissa. Thank you all for coming.
So here we go. So the first topic for the Better Buildings Make Better Communities in the bullets that we kind of shared with you folks was managing the vital connection between the indoors and the outdoors there. So today, so proud to welcome, and thank you all for joining us, the viewers. There's quite a few of you in there, so that's very, very special. I'd like to introduce Nick Bagatelos. We spoke a little bit before we started rolling here.
I'm a glazer from California. I built unitized curtain walls my whole career. In the last 5 years, I've been working with a new technology, which is vacuum insulating glass. First factory in North America went online last month. And the product, instead of 1-inch double pane, which is plus or minus R2 to R3, this product is 3/8 of an inch, or I guess, what is that? 2.5 centimeters. And it is R20. So the product gives the opportunity for windows and fenestration to dramatically improve the thermal conductance. And I'm working with 2 strategies on that, a vacuum insulated glass replacement that goes into old single pane windows. And the second part is a super performing low carbon mass timber curtain wall system. So that's why I'm here.
Very cool. And you're also a BBFH alum.
Yeah, yeah. I had the opportunity to do a really good podcast about 2 months ago.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Nick. So next up, let's do Seth Warren Rose. Do you want to give us a little introduction to yourself?
Sure. I'm the founding director of Anaref Institute, which is coming up on 25 years next year. Founded in, we work out of Washington, D.C., and Ann Arbor Institute produces reports that look at socially responsible, sustainable development. We look a lot at buildings, which I guess is the reason that I was honored to be invited to this. But we do look at some other things, and what we primarily look at is solutions that have been successfully implemented in the environment, built environment. So that's about it.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate you staying up a little later to join us here. Okay, so next up we have Blaine Brownell. Blaine, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, thanks, Melissa. Can you all hear me? Okay. So thank you for inviting me. So I'm an architect with a focus on sustainable materials and applications, especially innovative, cutting-edge materials, and also an educator and administrator. So I'm currently the director of the UNC Charlotte Ravin School of Architecture. And I do want to mention that I had an opportunity to write about Solera in my first book, Transmaterial, about transformational materials, back in 2005.
Love it.
So I appreciate the chance to reconnect.
Go Niners. I'm a Charlotte, North Carolina guy myself, so glad to see you again, Blaine.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you too for sharing your book. That's definitely something we should all look into. So next up we have Keith Robertson, hailing from Halifax. Keith, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Sure. Yes, I'm Keith Robertson in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in the traditional Mi'kmaq territory known as Shibuktuk, which means Great Harbor. I am architect by training, but by practice, I do a lot of sustainable design consulting in the world of LEED and green globes and zero carbon and things like that. I'm also a sessional instructor at the School of Architecture in Halifax, the Dalhousie as well. And interestingly enough, my students have an assignment due tonight, which was a daylighting assignment. So we actually get them to do some daylight modeling as part of their design course to see how that influences the actual design that they're working on.
Well, that's very relative to us for sure. That's great. Love to hear it. That was the last intro. We had Pascal Sablon, who was also a BBFH guest, but unfortunately she had to bow out last minute, but we'll save her for the next. Oh, you're good.
It's good now?
Yes, don't do anything different.
Dr. Doug Milburn, everybody.
Okay. So there we go. So yeah, Doug Milburn, I'm founder of AGL a long time ago, and I'm thrilled to be here, and I apologize for my really rotten start that I pulled off here, but I just want to say, first of all, thanks so much to the panelists, and thank you so much to the attendees, and really looking forward to this, our first session of 4, and really looking forward to a good discussion. And this discussion is about the relationship between buildings and their community. And in particular, our whole thing of war on dull buildings. And we said war on dull buildings, as John said, it's, the architecture, building design, building technology just affects so many things. It affects the human beings inside and outside. It's an extensive topic. It's so extensive. We picked a few topics to go into in this. And the general thing of this forum is our relationship to community. And we think about it, we build buildings. Communities are all so different as the human beings that make them up are, as the cultures that form around the human beings. And great buildings should support great communities and all the things that go with that. That's our belief. And as we sit here on a transition, and we are moving towards sustainable buildings, and whether everybody agrees with it or not, the movement is in that direction of sustainable buildings. And our thing and reason for this discussion, reason for the forum, is we believe there's a danger if buildings are driven by energy, by single factors. and single factors, energy usage and carbon are mission critical, but they're not everything. We build buildings for a purpose. And we need to get that right. A lot of discussion about how to create sustainable buildings, and that we find there's just a little bit of a shortage of discussion. I'd like to hear it louder in public on the impact, what sustainable means, and the impact of it on the people inside and outside the buildings. So here we are to talk about outside the buildings. And sustainability has many aspects, and buildings have many aspects. So that's where we go. That's where we want the discussion to roll around here. And we have 4 bullets that we've asked you guys to think about it. And just before we do that, the sort of the first item that was on the list that we passed around, when you think about buildings, and if we could go all the way back here, because I think it's a good place to start really at first principles, and you think about buildings and why we come into buildings. And and the answer to that, I think, is a very simple: to get out of the outdoors. And it's a little bit circular, I know, but why do we get out of the outdoors? We get out of the outdoors because there is we get out of the elements is the I guess a little more refined way to say that. And then to get more specific, we come outside, and it depends on where you live. If you live in a southern climate, you come in to go to the heat and the sun. If you live in a more northern climate, it's get out of the cold and the wind and the rain and the like. So we do that. We come into a building to disconnect from the outdoor environment. If we disconnect too fully, we end up going into a cave. And I say cave, we can think of cave literally and also think of it figuratively. Unfortunately, in buildings, a lot of people do go into caves, sometimes by necessity. A lot of the time, it's more economics that forces us to do that. The example that comes to mind for me all the time when you talk about going into a cave and disconnecting from the outdoors is when you walk into a big box store. And we think of the big box store, and I'm going to think of that at one extreme of disconnecting, highly disconnecting from the environment outside. And the advantages to doing that, we build our buildings sort of totally opaque materials. It's got some advantages. Number one, it's inexpensive. Number two, if you want to build a very, very energy efficient building, you can do extremely well on it. All you need to do is just very simply put a whole lot of insulation into it and create very, very efficient HVAC systems. And you can get down to some pretty low energy and low energy usage rates on a per unit floor area when you do that. Problem with that, the human beings come inside the disconnect from the environment, but when you do it too completely, it becomes a problem. And everybody knows that. I don't have to say too much about that. I want to hear with you guys about that. And if you think about that one extreme and just think of it as a framework as we talk about that, that's the high level of disconnection. Let's go to the other level of disconnection or of connection. So we come to get outside the elements. Let's go to the classic glass box. And we do the glass box. So glass boxes are, built for architectural reasons and highly connected. If you build an all glass building, it's highly connected to the exterior. It's connected. Now all of a sudden we have our daylight back, but it's a bit problematic because it can be a bit, let's just say the word solar cooker, can be a little bit of harsh. If you try to correct that by graying out our windows, let's tint down our windows, let's drop our solar gain down. Yeah, you can take care of that, but all of a sudden when you look outdoors, it starts to look pretty November-y. And also you don't get that indoor view, which is sometimes what people are after glass for, so the people outside can see in. So we struggle on that in the all glass building, and its energy efficiency tends to be terrible. So there's the two extremes. So most buildings are built somewhere in between that. And that whole idea of managing that connection and its impact on energy usage, impact sustainability, and impact on the community itself. So we, Advanced Glazings have been, 25 years, actually, I think more than 25 years on the road, talk to architects and building owners and the like, and facilities managers. And that's where it comes from. That's a huge part, that whole thing of how you connect. Today, really want to talk about that outside looking in thing as we build different buildings. One last thing, let's talk about our new energy codes that we have in areas that are adopting ASHRAE 90.1 energy codes. Great place to go. More stringent building energy codes as far as I'm concerned. But on the prescriptive side of that code, it says 30% window wall area. And so by prescriptive, we're not building all glass buildings anymore. You have to go performance route to do that. So as we think about that, that building with 30% window wall area can be, you know, there's lots of space to do stuff. And I'd love to hear about people as we talk about this, hear about people's view on that. But as we do that, there is really a danger. The Soviet brutalist architecture, I think, meets 30% window wall ratio. And there's some pretty nasty buildings that can be, I say some great buildings too. Sometimes is what people want to do. Anyway, there's a framework for us, you know, as we talk about that. So when we think about managing that connection, what's it like from the outside? What's the impact of the community? What's the impact, the flavor of the community, people outside there? What's the impact, and how does that impact what we're trying to do with the building? There's a framework. And Melissa, just over to you for really quick. You can just read us off our first discussion point for that, and then we'll pass it around to the panelists.
Okay, I think you basically did the first discussion point. It was about managing the vital connection between the indoors and the outdoors.
Yeah. So, and the next one on
setting
that.
So for better or for worse, the built environment sets the tone of the perceived brand identity of the community.
So yeah, anyways, we pass that over to you guys in the panel, and then yeah, setting that tone for the community. What's the brand of the community? Who is the community, and how does sustainable building and better buildings for humans impact that? So let's pass it over to let's pick maybe Nick. We'll pick you out of the.
Well, when I think of, you know, I'm from California, and most of the buildings that I've built have had to deal with solar gain. The product that I'm using now and really promoting is more about the, you know, that conductance. So the connection to the outside, every building that I've ever built has been really based on kind of balancing those pieces that you've discussed. So when I think of the connection to the outdoor, it's really about bringing in those beautiful views in California into the building and creating spaces. A lot of the work that I did was in Silicon Valley and technology companies, and they're big glass boxes that wanted to get that feel. So I've seen that connection created in the branding in a place like Silicon Valley, where you've got these large buildings that have a lot of exterior envelope. So you get a lot of people being able to view the outside. But I also feel the branding in a place, I grew up in Sacramento, a lot of those buildings, they're not brutalist, but they're big, dominating buildings that are trying to show like maybe strength of the government. So I see that branding in buildings, right? There's this strength versus this openness that kind of meet the two, you know, the two desires of the type of buildings. And you use the term cave, and when I think of net zero buildings, for a caveman to make a cave warm, it wasn't too hard. You know, they just burn a little fire and you've got 3-foot thick walls in a cave, you're fine. But getting that daylighting in is, I really think, what separates us from being cavemen and being like modern human beings, is that connection to the outside, and windows are what create that. So I think if you want to talk brand, I think the human brand in a building is having the window, and then connecting that with the right amount of daylighting and reducing the right amount of glare is important. And you know, when I think of the thermal resistance and the product that I'm working with now, vacuum glass, that ability to stand close to a wall, and I know in a place like Halifax or, you know, in Canada, on a cold day with the single pane window, you're going to freeze next to the window, and people are going to move themselves 60 inches to further away from a window so it doesn't affect them. And with a good thermal product, it allows people to be right up against that window and see that outside, but not feel the effects. So I think, you know, what we're doing in fenestration is really important to facilitate that brand for a community or for a government or for individual businesses. So that's what I think of when I think of brand and daylighting. So
okay, and yeah, and do you see the more glass? So you see, obviously it's your interest and our interest. People use more glass from that outside. The improvement in the.
I built a net zero energy factory in 2008, and the factory was a big warehouse that I put skylights in and did all the renovations to get it to zero. And it was easy with limited daylighting. It's much more difficult to get to zero energy and to get to low carbon with windows. So I've seen, if anything, a trend towards reducing fenestration, which I saw from 1985 when I started through 2010. There was just more glass and more glass and more glass in every building, and we had to deal with the problems with the performance of the glass. And I've seen a pretty rapid trend towards less glass. That's been my and then there's a gentleman named Scott Thompson, who's probably the greatest glass scientist in the world, and he started this idea of the war for the wall, and the folks who want opaque walls have been winning. That's what I see, and I think it's dehumanizing, and I think we need to do things that make more fenestration possible with the parameters of carbon and energy usage. So,
okay, thank you. What do you think, Keith? Let's go to Keith next. And what's your view on that? The impact as we try to build better buildings, more sustainable buildings. What's the impact the community brand of the community?
Big question. But I'll talk to your first point was about managing the connection. And I tend to agree with you that we do a lot of things for, sort of an architectural icon idea. And there's also a danger in designing around single parameters, as you've said. And I've seen, in fact, even in the past year, schools, and I consult on a lot of schools. And I think schools are a really important example of how we can manage that. And I've seen where owners have become very prescriptive. So they've done some sort of energy analysis on a generic school and said that the school should have a 22.8% window to wall ratio. And that just seems to be the wrong way to go. If you want an energy target, set an energy target and let me decide how I'm going to get there. And where glass is, in my mind, really, really important for a classroom, for example, might be a matter of where you put the glass, and it might be a matter of actually glass is going to be an energy advantage for you. So depending on orientation and what you're trying to control. So that's a big part of it. And I always look at the connection between the indoors and the outdoors. Obviously, it's through the transparent and translucent stuff. And what is the purpose of these transparent things? One is you can provide views with them. Another is you can provide daylight with them. Another is you can gain heat. And sometimes it's all three or any two or any combination of those things. So I think we need to think about when we're putting an opening through a wall or adjusting a wall, we need to think about what the purpose of that is. So that's one of the things. In terms of human experience of it, rating systems and studies have often look at the quality of that. What is the quality of the view? It's not just a porthole to see a brick wall across the alley. It's, what's the quality of that view? What are you seeing through it? How close are you to the window? What is, are you seeing foliage and movement outside of that? So that's one of the aspects of it. Another one is just daylight, and are you getting adequate daylight? And there are a lot of studies that show the importance of daylight in all sorts of different building designs. So setting the tone for the brand of the community, yes, I think it's important. And then we have to look at the building types. Buildings are done for all sorts of different reasons. An example I'll probably refer to a few times here is Halifax did a new public library, I guess about 10 years ago now. And in my mind, is a shining example of a building that is welcoming, it's open, it is both visible and welcoming from the outside. It also creates spaces outside the building that are public, spaces inside the building that are public. It's also managed in a way that's welcoming to people. So they're not trying to keep people out. If there's a homeless person that wants to come in and warm up, that's fine. You know, so the way we operate the buildings is part of that as well. So I think maybe I'll leave it there because we'll get some input from others as well.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and that library, that is a beautiful, absolutely beautiful library. Nice addition to the community. Absolutely love it. Which I am just in your neck of the woods over Northwest Arm right now, actually. So anyway,
may I add something to what Keith said? You know, Keith, the actual function of that wall is really important because in my career, the skin has always been a static design. Every wall has the same glass. And as I've seen the technology evolve, you know, they've been talking about electrochromic glass and it's out there in the market. There's no need for electrochromic glass on the north side of a building, but every job that I looked at that wanted EC, they were demanding the same look on that north elevation, which it has zero value, right? And the idea that architecture has to have a monolithic look on a building, I think is not the way the trend will go. It makes sense. Have electrochromic or whatever that is to reduce solar gain on that south elevation and probably the west. Maybe you need higher thermal on the north with a lot more glass. You know, that idea that four sides of a building have to be the same, I think is a mistake. And I think we're going to learn with the new technology that every wall can have a different look, and that becomes that branding and that uniqueness of a building. And, you know, so that that triggered that for me. So
love it. Appreciate it. Seth, what do you have to say about impact on the community of more sustainable building direction we should go and how it affects the community and their brand?
Well, I will say I love listening to architects talk about building design. I've never spoken to an architect and not learned something. It's interesting the way they view people's interactions with the buildings. One of the things that I would want to encourage, specifically to the issue that you're talking about branding, would be, and both of your guests spoke
Keith
about
and
this
Nick.
about Keith and Nick. Thank you. I'm terrible with names, by the way. I got screwed up with my own name.
It's okay. I have a list.
We're talking about the views. We talk about the views, and that's crucially important, as both of you have talked about. I would want to draw the circle bigger, beyond the view of the building, and involve the community in a way. I mean, one of the things that I love about the glass wall that you're talking about is that whether it be a window or some other kind of abilities, it gives us the ability to view into the building, and it's an invitation. When you look at the buildings that I first had to work in New York, in the sort of post World War II up until the Carter administration, when we realized we needed to save energy, those were the modern buildings that were uninviting, right? They had a door, and you weren't expected to be. You didn't feel like you were invited in, and then, of course, we went from what I call, function-centric to eco-centric, which, sort of began when Jimmy Carter put panels, solar panels on the roof of the White House. Jimmy Carter took them off. I mean, President Reagan took them off, as I think everyone knows. And that, and then I remember, that was LEED. And then I remember when WELL came in, and that was, I guess, what I would call the, people-centric design. And so I was talking to some of the people that are developing the Summer Olympics in Paris, and they have a 200-page, 150-page sustainability report. And they're doing a lot of things that you guys are talking about, which is great. But I was thinking, you know, there's going to be probably 5 million people coming. They're spending a ton of money, and they're not doing anything to involve the community. And I thought, what an opportunity, you know? I mean, and the Paris Accords, the Paris Agreements were in Paris, and the Olympics is going to be in Paris. So talk about bad branding to the very thing that you're talking about. Even the stuff that they're selling online is like plastic, Chinese made. No offense to China, but you know, I mean, it's just not. We don't need to put more plastic into the environment. It's like, you know, little trinkets. And why not do things that even those things are more environmentally forward thinking? So that I guess what I would want to say is I think a building is, to me, and it's because I work with architects and have been doing so for a long time. To me, a building is very important. It does, to me, brand the building, and I don't think that we as city planners or even as architects do a good job of, you know, getting the community involved in the building somehow, because I think it's more important than we really give it credit to, you know. And the buildings that have lasted, whether they're, you know, the Parthenon and the Pantheon, you know, they're the icons, and you go through history, those are the icons of society. So I think they have a lot of value, and we ignore that value as designers.
Thank you, Blaine. What's your view? Impact and brand of the community, and impact of sustainable building on our communities.
Thanks, Doug. So I think about the late Lance Hosey, who wrote the book The Shape of Green, and how he on this topic, how he distinguished what he called invisible green and visible green. So for him, invisible green is a lot of the work that we do, working with checklists on buildings, living building challenge, you know, life cycle assessments, all the data. The science is critical, and we have to do the science right. But often the strategies are implemented in a way that we can't tell. Like, communities can't tell the difference between, maybe, depending on the strategy, a LEED Platinum building or a living building and kind of conventional building. This isn't always the case, but I think a lot of the standards and guidelines we pursue in sustainable design don't necessarily emphasize that there's a change in identity, right? That something is recognizable. Of course, if we put solar panels on a roof, that's one form of recognition. And there are many other perhaps common methods, but I think more of a focus on visible green. How do we develop new design opportunities? We've got some fantastic material technologies constantly, you know, growing in number and variety to implement. Some of these are not commercially viable yet, but I think especially at the facade, one of the perhaps positive sides coming out of the pandemic is we realized that we can do a lot better in terms of the relationship between inside and outside. Is like we're talking about considering buildings as kind of hermetic. You know, I just need to seal off the outside entirely. That's not really a viable strategy. And as we became very aware, buildings became kind of scary places, especially public or commercial buildings during the pandemic, when we had underperforming HVAC systems, and people were getting sicker in buildings than they would be outside. So looking for better strategies to exchange air, looking for better strategies to bring in daylight, to bring workers back into the office, right? Improve mental health. I'm thrilled about things like new types of shaded, ventilated screens, concepts that bridge landscape architecture between inside and outside, and thinking about new technologies that absorb carbon. I've got a faculty member who's in charge of our integrated design research lab, who's worked on this microalgae facade, for example. You can see a picture here that it shades, the algae absorb CO2, they bloom. You can use the algae for biofuel and energy. I mean, there's so many exciting kind of shaded, intelligent facade systems, and we can work more as a culture to think more about models like adaptive thermal comfort than it's got to be 72 degrees for everybody year round. So I think I'm excited. I think there's a lot that we can do, and that can ultimately manifest something visible that people can look at, and they may not understand it at first if it's an algae facade, but that they can understand something different is going on here.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, you kind of tweak me a little bit there when you talk about landscape. We think about buildings. I always think of, I look. I mean, plants indoors and outdoors, just up an environment and a feel in a community. We think of like downtown Manhattan or something, and it's concrete jungle, and it's pretty dehumanizing. But that role of plants and algae is a whole different take. I'm interested to learn a little bit about that. So,
one thought is just to add real quick. If anyone's had a chance to tour the Amazon Spheres project in Seattle, I only visited once, and it's kind of a showcase piece. But as I understand it, employees can reserve space and kind of work there. I think that's one of the workplaces of the future. I mean, basically to work in a garden, to be in a place not unlike where Nick is now, but I think to be surrounded by oxygenating plants is a pretty fantastic thing.
You know what? We another company I'm involved in Nova Scotia, our buildings they're fully daylighted office spaces, and they got lots of height in them, and we have a lot of plants around now. We've been talking about putting some netting and letting some vines run up and really greening the whole space, because I just love what my office is full of plants, and our large sort of cubicle area daylighted. We put in about 4 times the amount of fresh air, and there's a lot of plants. The plants grow wonderfully in a couple thousand lux. So yeah, it's game changing, certainly in the interior, but exterior, that harmonizing interior and exterior. Okay.
We grow lots of money trees in the area too, but that's not this.
Good point, Stephen. Yeah, we do. So Melissa, what's her next bullet?
Well, we're kind of naturally going through multiple bullets at one time with each speaker, so I really appreciate the assist on this, everybody. But one of the ones that I don't think we really truly hit was the better buildings make better people through mood, behavior, positivity, interaction, productivity, all that. We didn't really talk about that.
Anybody want to volunteer to be first rather than me picking?
Well, I would just sort of jump in, since daylighting is a big part of what this discussion is. I mean, we've done all sorts of research and interviews with folks that work in and live in naturally daylit buildings, and we get great results saying, this is the building is better, we're happier. There was a building in Atlanta that had a rooftop. The whole rooftop was daylit, and we talked to the office workers. There was about 15 office workers in the building. They bought the building, and they spent a lot of money to do that, and they all said it's a huge difference. So you get productivity gains, you get fewer sick days, just up and down. If you own a building and you have employees working in that building, natural interior daylight is an obvious way to get. You're going to make more money by your happier employees than you'll ever get from the energy savings that you might get.
Yeah, and that is such a good point. And I'm a glazer. I started my career installing storefronts in retail centers in the Central Valley in California, and I built unitized curtain walls for high rises. The discussion of comfort, literally, I've done 500 design build curtain walls in my career. Never does that point enter into the discussion as a real part. The architectural team may bring it up, but in the end, it's always that price and then maybe the performance of the building that drive the design. It would be really great if we could bring what you just said into the design of the building, because owners don't get that. And the value proposition for tenants is so huge. And the fact that we do have some analytics is important, but it's just not part of the design process as much as it should be. And I wish it was.
I could tell you the owners get it after the building is done. They get it then.
That's too late. That's just too late, you know? But it never comes in at the beginning. And it would be wonderful if over the next decade that becomes a bigger part of the design. And I don't know where we start with that. You know, this group knows that, and I think that's why we're all together. But, you know, as a selfish glazer who wants to put more glass in a building, it makes sense. But but the glass is usually one of the most expensive ways to skin a building, right? So there's always that push. And if we could drive those analytics into the building, I think it would make for more comfort. And I have no idea how to do that, but it's so evident and everyone knows it, but it never becomes part of the real discussion. It's always just
we probably have enough interviews over the course of decade at least that we could do that. We'd have enough data. We could probably put something like that together. I'll have to think about it.
So Nick, if I could, I just let me chime in on that. And Seth, on the Harvard Business Review just came out with something on employee perks, a list of them. I didn't read the whole article, but daylight was the number one voted as number one perk in that study, which was interesting. We talked about green, and the idea of visible green was discussed.
Yeah.
And and it's like that's like daylight's that number one. So here's what we look at. I'm going to go something adjacent. Like I'm a believer in daylight, obviously, earn my living in daylight, but fresh air as well. So here's math I did on space it's where my office is, and there's 50 employees in that space, and there's something well north of 50,000 a year, but I can do the math in my head on it. So 50,000 a year is like $2.5 million of payroll in that space. And that you do that, and it's basically a 2,000 hour a year. It's office space. It's 8 hour a day space. So if you look at that, well, that's been operated. There's $1,250 per hour of wage going out of there, if the math in my head is correct. But it's that ballpark. And the makeup air in there. I read a paper on carbon dioxide and productivity and ability to do tasks accurately, et cetera. And we looked at it. We said our makeup air cost to heat makeup air. There was no heat recovery in that. Was $3 an hour. And you look at that, $1,250 an hour. And if you poison people with CO2, you drop their productivity off, and you drop their ability to do tasks accurately. You drop creativity off, according to that study. And it was really, really convincing data on that. And you look at that, $3 an hour in energy. And again, I'm not promoting, the idea of making energy efficient buildings, but and daylight is going to be the similar economics. We pay money for HVAC, we pay money for capital costs when we put daylight in buildings. The advent of vacuum glass, and looking forward to seeing that in the market. And our R18 and R25 translucent glass really mitigates the impact of that. There's an impact in capital costs for it too. But you look at it, and go, wow, that $1,250 an hour. If you crank that up 5%, it pays for everything. And the studies in daylight suggest that you're going to get 5 to 15% on productivity overall when you do that. And it's fascinating. It's just fascinating that it's not just the de facto standard because of that.
And maybe this is the time, because as we know, nobody wants to go back to their offices, right? But I know that people don't work as well alone and at home. It's just people may say they do, and people may think they do in business. The businesses that fully engage with that are going to fail. That's just reality. In the next decade, the people who engage in people working at home fully in their corporations, they're going to fail. And the people who are able to bring people together in units, whether it's part-time or whatever, that's where you're going to have an advantage in the long term in your business. And maybe this is the time that we can get that out to the world and say, this is the way to bring people back into your buildings. And if you own a $300 million building in downtown San Francisco and you want people to come in here, you're going to need to do these things to make that comfort level. So I don't know, maybe this is the time for these messages to get out there, because it's going to be important for productivity, and you're going to see that more now in this next decade than you did in the past 2 or 3, because people were there together. Maybe it didn't feel as good in the building as it should have, but now they won't come unless it feels good. So you're going to really lose productivity in the next decade unless you get people in, right? So I don't know, maybe there's some tie there that a group like this can help push out into the world.
Very, very, very well said. Yeah, and that thing, as we change buildings, that's as I said my opening, that's the fear that we end up with Soviet style brutalist architecture, and at the same time with this tipping point, this real opportunity to go the other direction. So Keith, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, sure. For me, with regard to the question, it's all about occupant satisfaction, and you've talked about a number of different ways of doing that. And getting fresh air, yes, is great. Having adequate daylight is great. But other things that come into that, I mean, views obviously comes into that as well. And one of the things is, I think subconsciously we desire a connection or consciously desire a connection to nature. And even in the space which has limited windows that I'm here now, I've got a boardroom table that's made out of 150-year-old salvaged wood. And just the fact that I can touch and see that wood makes a difference to me. And I think it's pretty easy to argue that when you have things such as the ability to control the light in your space, the ability to control ventilation or open a window, these are all good things. They're going to reduce stress levels and increase occupant satisfaction. And I think that's pretty easy to argue that that's good for people. And I think that's conversely or carries on to being good for the community as well.
Right on. Blaine?
So this might sound like a stretch, but it's connected to Melissa's question about human behavior. I think about a lecture that I saw given by the Stanford neuroscientist David Eagleman. If anyone has seen him, he's got some podcasts and TED Talks and things. And it's interesting in light of our theme today with the word war, because he explains that the human brain is constantly at war with its own tendencies for automation and innovation. So on one hand, the automatic side, we want efficiency. We crave, figuring out tasks that we can do simpler without even thinking about them, right? I think these are the dull buildings, right? Just make it efficient, lowest common denominator, don't have to think about it. But the human brain is equally enamored with and craves novelty and what he calls mediated behavior. And so if we're only pursuing automatic behavior, then we can't innovate. There's no creativity. Mediated behavior is, according to Eagleman, the neurological basis of creativity. And so there's scientific evidence that we can't just have dull buildings for the human brain, for our own function.
That's absolutely fascinating. And you say that, and I just think of the buildings we have and the companies that I'm involved with. We have gone to fully daylighted buildings. We put view in where we need it, and that environment, when you create that very, very nice environment, and the companies are all innovation-based companies. And yeah, you just create that environment, and my God, it feeds it just absolutely feeds that creativity. And I look at that, and I'm thinking of John Phillips had harkened back when he visited one of our daylighted buildings, and he said harken back to his time at Bank of America and in cubicle farm. You know, low drop ceiling cubicles going on as far as you can, and you know, fluorescent or LED lighting kind of eating at your head. And yes, it's not conducive for people doing their, you know, in fact, I think it's kind of dehumanized. Even if the work done there is rote work, I just don't think it's nice to do that to human beings. I think
they won't do it now. They people won't come to work and work in those places now, right? I mean, that's what's going on in the world. Is we have enough abundance that people are like, well, I just won't go to work if I have to be in that environment. So it's evident and telling, right, that we need better, more exciting buildings. And you know what? Do you think that we can go to the tech community and say, you know, having a foosball table isn't what's going to bring people in? You need this daylighting and a comfortable building. It's not about foosball, guys. You know, it's just not. And that's seems like with, you know, I'm been working with these tech firms, and if they've put a foosball and then they have a keg at the end of the week, that's what they're doing to bring people back into the office. It's like, we need beautiful things that are going to inspire people, right? And I think it's a good story to tell, and I think the population, at least in North America that I know, is ready for that story, right?
I love that, Nick. I really also wouldn't mind a keg, just for the record. I'm also just going to give a note. We have 3 minutes left to go. So Doug or anybody wants to add
go ahead, Seth.
Let me just, because I don't know if you're aware, we run a right to daylight campaign, and the campaign is to attract the media to get them to write stories about natural interior daylight. And we started it by working with the United Nations about 10 years ago, for them to say that daylight is a natural right. So I don't want to put my sales hat on in that way, but just so you know, there is an effort going on to do that. And that's
Windows, not foosball.
Windows, not foosball. So look, real quick, finish this up. Can we go around 1 minute each? What's your community look like as it changes over the next 20 years? What's it look like 20 years forward if we're successful at creating better buildings? You want to try that, Nick?
Yeah, I think you're going to have 4 sides of a building looking completely different, that are taking advantage of photosynthesis on the south elevation that blocks the glare, full vision on the north elevation, because with you know, vacuum insulating glass. And then on that east and west, they're going to be different, because you want some that's going to let in a little bit more light in the morning and make sure you don't have that burning heat at the end of the day in August. So that's what I think is we're going to have buildings that have 4 sides in the next 20 years. And I'd say a lot more glass, because with our 23/8" glass, you can do anything with a product that will last for, you know, 50 to 100 years on the exterior of a building. So that's my prediction.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Keith, what's Nova Scotia or Halifax or whatever you want to pick? What's it look like in the, you know, if we're successful?
Kind of on the periphery of this discussion is we're going to be a lot more aware of materials, of how the materials we use impact the environment. So we're going to see improvements in concrete. We're going to see a lot more natural materials, carbon sequestering materials, and that kind of stuff. In terms of connection to nature, what I want to see is buildings that are a lot more accessible, as in approachable, walkable, connections between indoor spaces and outdoor spaces. So you've got a variety of things that occupants can actually need to go outside for a break or tend a garden or whatever. They've got the ability to do that. So I think there's the human experience is a huge part of what we need to do in the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Awesome. Thank you. Blaine?
Thank you. I would love to see more creative and collaborative activities, material research development between manufacturers and designers and students. I'm teaching a class now about material strategies and sustainable architecture. And one of the big projects is students develop their own materials as a kind of entrepreneurial project. Some of them working directly with manufacturers to kind of re-envision their products in new ways. And it's so exciting to see that kind of creativity and that exchange. And I think it's going to take all of us, and let's roll up our sleeves and get to work.
So as you say that, as somebody who came out of grad school and was commercialized the new material, that's incredible. Yeah, actually, I'd love to talk to you about that. Well, offline, we have a chat about that. Love to talk about that. And then Seth, you want to wrap it up? What's the world look like? What do communities look like as we win the sustainability game and do it all right?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it's sort of, I want to circle back to the very first thing that you said when you talked about what is the purpose of building, and the building, simplistically, it's to get out of the, come in from the outside. This is what I'd say. I, grew up in in what I would call, function-centric buildings. My career sort of worked initially in ecocentric buildings. Human-centric buildings is kind of where we are now. The future is what I'm going to call resilient-centric buildings. Climate change hasn't yet begun. We're at the inflection point. We're just beginning to see a change in climate, the likes of which most people have yet to really understand. We're going to see heat and humidity and floods and fires and things that architects just did not have to look at when they were going to architecture school. It's going to be a completely different world, and I'm calling it, I'm calling it a resilient-centric design. It's unfortunate, but it's going to be complicated. It's going to be more complicated than most of us can do. Fortunately, we have AI to save us.
Good. Interesting. Okay. Thank you very much. Listen, thanks to the panel. Thanks everybody attended. I'm going to pass it over to John Phillips, I think, who's going to do a wrap up for us.
Yes,
John?
thank you from me also, guys. Really appreciate it. You made my job very easy.
Yeah, and that's the wrap up from me. Just what an engaging discussion, everyone. I'm thrilled that this was our inaugural session that you've attended here. Super quality expertise and wonderful perspectives, wide diversity of opinion, just a really robust discussion. Logistically, we will cascade out a link that you can share of this discussion with your community, your company, all of your respective social media audiences, etc. So feel free to repurpose this seminar as you see fit. And yeah, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you for your time and your expertise today. And that does conclude our first session of WODBS. So we'll see you hopefully at the next 3.